Welcome to the Living Medicine Podcast, where we talk about ethical medical use of psychedelic psychotherapy, teaching skills, examining the issues, and interviewing interesting people. Now let's start today's show.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Sandy Newis, and I am from the Living Medicine Institute. As you all know, this is the Living Medicine Institute podcast, and we offer training and clinically relevant content for clinical and medical professionals who are interested in psychedelic medicine and using legal psychedelics in clinical settings. So I am absolutely delighted to be here with Sherry Rais. And thank you so much, Sherry, for being here. I'm really grateful for you to making the time. I know that you're super busy and doing lots of really important things that I look forward to talking about. I'm just going to do a brief little introduction. For those of you who are not familiar with Sherry, she is the CEO and co-founder of Enthea. And has helped dozens of organizations raise funds and operate according to their mission and values, and to implement processes that enhance their overall efficiency. Sherry believes in living and working in alignment with purpose and is currently focused on expanding access to psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy to really alleviate human suffering. She holds a master's degree in public policy and administration from the London School of Economics and a bachelor's degree in psychology and international development from McGill University. And she also completed the certificate in psychedelic therapies and research from CIAS in 2021. And Sherry, I just want to say, as I read that, as I've gotten to know you a little bit and have been paying attention, I really see that in how you are in the world, that you really do put out that piece about living in alignment with your mission and values. And I think really inspire others to do the same. So I just want to say that right off the bat, that I really appreciate that about you. So thank you. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I thought I would just start off by just how did you get into this field? An ever evolving niche. And for those who've been around it for a long time, say it's been around a long time. Others say it's brand new. And kind of how did you get into this? And how do you see yourself and your role in the field currently?
Yeah, well, I got into this field because I think my journey in general in life has been shaped by a lifelong commitment, as you mentioned, to reducing human suffering. I am very pained when I see suffering. And so I spent a decade working on poverty reduction and lived in some of the world's poorest countries and helped create programs with the goal of reducing poverty. And after doing that for a decade, I really saw firsthand the interconnectedness between poverty reduction and mental health, and that you really can't really eradicate poverty without addressing mental health. You can reduce it and you can make a lot of improvements, and you can give people money and build schools and give them better access to primary health care and provide access to technology. There's a lot of things you can do. But what I saw firsthand is that will help a lot of people, but there's a huge part of the population that won't be helped because they are living with so much trauma, depression, and anxiety. And actually to kind of like illustrate that a little bit further, not to go too much into like a rabbit hole, the occurrence of depression and anxiety in low income countries is like more than double than in high income countries. So there really is a big gap, and that's what I was confronted with firsthand. And so I started to look for solutions for mental health because of the work I was doing, and saw how broken our mental health system is and the traditional approaches are. And I stumbled upon the data around ketamine-assisted therapy and psychedelic-assisted therapy. And that's what really got me into this field, seeing that there are tools that have the power to break through where so many conventional treatments have failed, bringing rapid, profound healing to people that I had seen suffering for years. And so it just didn't make sense to me that these incredible, innovative treatments are not easily accessible and they're not affordable. And so, yeah, that's kind of what got me into the field.
That's interesting. This is another rabbit hole, and then I'll kind of come back more. But I mean, as you or some of you all might know, we're living in a disaster zone here in Asheville, North Carolina, and I am actually in an interesting bubble near the downtown area that has somewhat returned to normal. Like I'm on a kind of a spotty internet, and we don't have potable water, but really that's just an inconvenience because that in the surrounding communities it's still flattened, and there are people living in tents on the foundations. And what I'm noticing is the efforts to try to help with economic, getting people back on their feet economically all require a lot of wherewithal, like a high level of executive functioning. Like you've got to get on the computer and you've got to be motivated. And on harder days where you're, sad or anxious or overwhelmed, it's much harder to access that. So I'm kind of relating to what you're saying in real time, that the people who are struggling the most with mental health issues are the ones that are going to be the least likely to be able to access the aid that's available to them and be able to utilize it because they're just utterly demoralized. And I'm seeing that in real time, like, yesterday. Like this is very much happening in my own community. So I can really appreciate what you just said there.
Actually, after a natural disaster, and I'm so sorry that, you've had to go through this and so many other people have been suffering after this hurricane in the US. We don't talk a lot, actually. We talk about like rebuilding and infrastructure and how to get the homes back and internet back. But it's really difficult to get back into things because of the psychological effects that you're seeing from natural disasters. I could be wrong on this statistic, so fact check me, please. But I'm pretty sure that somewhere between 40 to 50% of people, I did some natural disaster work as well, will have some form of psychological distress after the disaster, which is really high. We could probably look at like what happened after Katrina as an example, but there's so much trauma that we don't actually talk about addressing. We focus on rebuilding homes and rebuilding infrastructure, but we don't think about the long-term trauma from these natural disasters. And
right.
It's
because what's happened here in Asheville is an eradication of culture, because these are rural communities that have lived on these lands and in these mountains and on these rivers for a really, really, really long time. And, it's not just like buildings destroyed. It's environmental destruction on an epic scale. And we could spend the whole time on that. But where I'm going with that I think is really interesting is what is also happening here is a massive civilian effort, where communities are coming together and offering support. And what I know as a trauma person is that, feeling a sense of community and belonging can be one of the things that can really mitigate a trauma response. And so it'll be interesting to kind of track that and really pay attention to that, which really brings me back to psychedelics, because we're all kind of in community around this. And that's really one of the profound effects, I think, of psychedelic work, is that it helps people more access community. It's not just about individual self-exploration. And so how can we, do this well and in community is one of the things that I'm super interested in. So yeah, you kind of said that you worked in many countries and many leaders in different contexts. So, really that kind of brings us again into that community piece, from village chiefs to prime ministers, and seeing how communities find this work with poverty and working with trauma. And I'm curious how that's influenced who you are in the world. Like, that's a lot of different contexts and a lot of different domains and a lot of different countries and a lot of different social and political systems. So I'm just curious how that's influenced you.
Yeah, I think working with a wide range of people, leaders from grassroots community organizations to, national policymakers has definitely shaped the way I engage with the world. One of the key lessons I think I've learned is that no matter the scale, whether you're dealing with a village chief focusing on local issues or the minister of health trying to navigate national challenges, the underlying human need is very much the same. And so I see like what success, and uh, for me, that goes back to this desire to alleviate suffering and improve quality of life. Um, that's kind of, that doesn't change no matter who you're dealing with. There's this desire to, hopefully, unless you're dealing with bad actors, but if you're dealing with good actors, then there's um, this desire to, honestly, I might get in trouble for saying this, but even sometimes when you're dealing with bad actors, see the good in people, and I think they're still in the reason they're in that line of work is hopefully because maybe there's some power, reasons and things like that. But there's also a desire to help people. At least I like to believe that. And that the diversity of those experiences for me has given a deep sense of empathy. And I think the ability to listen to what's not always said. In global work, especially, I think you sort of have to read between the lines, or maybe it's just policy work and government work, but whether it's like understanding, the unspoken struggles of a marginalized community, or navigating the delicate political dynamics within a government. Yeah, I think I've just learned to be attuned to these subtle, more complex layers of human experience, and that translates directly into my work with psychedelic therapy as well.
Right. Well, it's interesting because power dynamics are so at play. And I think as the field evolves, it's going to be so important that people continue to talk about that, from, clients or participants being, abused or taken advantage of, into just general power structures around money and finances and access. So,
yeah.
I mean, I very much appreciate you bringing that up. You keep mentioning, reducing human suffering as kind of being your North Star, what ultimately drives your compass. And you've said that a lot, just even in this time. And I've heard you say that before. I'm wondering if there's anything else that you want to say about that, or if we've kind of covered it, and just, it seems like that's really driven all of your efforts.
Yeah. What I don't want to, I've already talked about it a few times.
No, I mean, there's plenty of reducing human suffering.
Yeah. So I think there are different types of suffering. There's physical, there's mental, there's financial, there's emotional, there's even spiritual suffering. Um, and my desire is for us to live in a world where that suffering is reduced as much as possible. I know that there's a reason we're here on this earth, not to get too esoteric. And probably some suffering is needed. Again, a conversation for maybe a different day or a different podcast. But in as much as I can help reduce any form of those types of suffering for people and create systems and processes that make that scalable, that's definitely how I want to spend my time. I think if we all pay attention to like the voice inside us, or what we're drawn to, um, people have different um, different reasons for living, let's say, or different North Stars. And that's just been a clear one for me since childhood. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the same for everyone, but, we're all impacted by our life experiences. And for me, being the daughter of immigrants and growing up in a, okay, middle class family, we weren't struggling to make ends meet, but we weren't living a incredibly lavish lifestyle. I was just very aware of how lucky I was to be born in Canada, and how different life might have been had my parents not emigrated to Canada. And so
where did they emigrate from? I know a lot of
my
people,
mom,
but
my mom is from Tanzania and my dad is from Pakistan. So Yeah, it that had a huge impact on me, and especially like traveling also as when I was younger, going back to Pakistan with my family and seeing how people lived there also made me really aware that I was extremely privileged. And,
Mm.
if I can spend my life trying to even the playing field, that would be a life well lived for me. So it just kind of
Mhm.
goes back to that.
Yeah, I love that. I can't help but kind of have grabbed hold of that sentence that you said maybe people do need some suffering. And, well, that would be a whole separate podcast, but I'm like, I'm just dying to know what are you thinking about that? Because that's a super interesting thing. And I get that we could spend hours on that. Um, and I'm
You
just
know
curious.
what? Yeah. So I think that one, and this is not my, area of expertise, it's just my own thoughts that
Right.
um
But it seems to really inform what we're talking about, right? That like, kind of alleviating suffering and power dynamics. And so, I'm just curious.
yeah, so I think um one, if we were to hmm, let me put it like this. I think that a lot of people chase happiness, like chase
Mhm.
this constant state of happiness.
Yeah.
And I don't, happiness is sort of like an outcome, but not the goal. Like if you're,
Mm.
I don't think we're supposed to be in a constant state of happiness,
Right.
or in a constant state of bliss, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
if we're living our lives mindfully and with intention and with purpose, we will end up being probably happier more times than we're not, because we
Mm.
have some sort of purpose. And for the purpose doesn't have to be the same for everyone, to be clear. Like, um, but if you're just chasing happiness and if you're just chasing feeling good all the time, I don't think that's very sustainable. That's just, again, just my opinion. But even going back to tying this more to psychedelic therapy, you know, psychedelic therapy is also not meant to be just a great time or just a
Right.
super
Right.
positive experience. Like, it's the outcome. The outcome is you get somewhere where you are feeling whole and connected, and yes, an outcome of happiness. But it's hard work, and there is suffering in the psychedelic therapeutic process, right? Like, there's places where it is dark and difficult. And for listeners to this podcast who haven't, experienced it, this might, I'm not trying to scare anyone.
It's true
um,
though. I mean, it's
but
other, it's true. It's 100% true. Like if you're doing a therapeutic process with psychedelics, like it's a safe bet that it's not going to be all awesome, just the same as with traditional psychotherapy. Like we have to go through the hard stuff to get to the other side. And it doesn't mean you
exactly.
get stuck in it. I think that's the difference. Like the goal is to not get stuck in it, but rather to learn from it, to be able to understand it, to heal it, to compartmentalize it at times. Like we don't change our life experience, our life trajectory, but we can find ways to sort of discharge it, like where it's not kind of ruling the charge with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one more thing I'll add, Sandy, is that I think you'll agree that, you know, suffering and discomfort is pretty essential in growth and transformation, like both in psychedelic therapy and broadly in life. It's critical to growth, transformation, understanding. It shapes how we navigate the world. Um, yeah, it's often, I think, a catalyst for change. When we encounter hardship,
Mhm.
we're forced to reevaluate our lives and our values and our priorities.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's how we discover our strength and our capacity for empathy. So that's kind of what I mean by, like, could be
Yeah.
another podcast, could be something we talk about all day, but like some suffering is it's an inevitable part of the human experience.
Right. And I see that too, like with clients that I work with, this avoidance of suffering. And like one of the teachings that I offer is, happiness is a learned skill. Like discomfort and distress is biological. It's actually drawing our awareness to things, that could kill us or eat us, right? Because our brains are still kind of in a place where there are predators lurking about who really are trying to kill us or eat us. So drawing our awareness to that is a survival mechanism. So in the modern world, being able to actually have a skill set that supports happiness while recognizing that suffering is inevitable, I think is really super important. And it's a major part of, mental health recovery and expansion. So
Yeah.
it certainly plays itself out in psychedelics, but also just in life. I'm living that in real time here in Nashville. Like, grateful to have a
Yeah.
roof over my head and, deeply grieving, what is happening in the ecosystem. So it's just an interesting thing to kind of play with. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And then I wanted to just kind of, it seems like you're very mission driven. I mean, you say that very openly, and you've said that to me. And then I also want to, talk about Enthea and what you're doing. So I'm curious first, kind of how those things link together. And then
Yeah.
tell me about Enthea. That seems like that's your, you know, current mission driven
Beautiful.
project to alleviate human suffering. And it just seems so in alignment with everything that you're talking about that I just really appreciate that. So yeah.
Yeah. So essentially Anthea Enthea's mission is very tied to reducing suffering, and it focuses specifically on making innovative mental health treatments accessible and affordable,
Hmm.
with a huge emphasis on safety. Um, and if we think about the fact that every 40 seconds someone in the world loses their life to suicide, and yet ketamine, yeah, yeah, um, very sad. Um, and then on the backdrop of that, ketamine is like the only medicine known to reduce suicidal ideation within hours, even more so than traditional psychedelics.
Oh yeah.
Um, and yet there's so much stigma around ketamine. It's not covered by traditional insurance. People have to pay out of pocket. Globally, most people wouldn't know how to access it, like even within the US, but then globally it gets worse. Although I did hear about a hospital in Kenya that was offering ketamine therapy, which I thought was cool. Um,
Really? Oh, that's so interesting.
yeah, yeah. And not to say like, other countries aren't doing it. But I do see the need for doing this in low income countries as well. Like I don't want to just focus on the US, but yeah, going back to Enthea, so we have these medicines that we know are effective, they're evidence based, they're safe, and yet access is this huge barrier. And so the idea of Enthea is to solve that problem and
Mm.
remove that barrier for people. And right now, we're doing that by trying to channel employer funding into benefits that cover these treatments. So, creating benefit plans that cover these treatments and increasing safety by vetting providers of these treatments, like ketamine therapy providers, so people know who to go to for good quality care.
Mhm.
Um, and tying that to, medical policies and standards of care that ensure patient safety, with the ultimate goal being that there would be a domino effect, that as more people start getting ketamine therapy, for example, through their employer, more people start talking about it and it becomes the norm.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So you, through getting employers to sign on with Enthea, is that correct? That
Yes.
they then provide a benefit to their employees to be able to access ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which is right now is our only legal psychedelic, except in a couple states where it's, kind of psilocybin is currently emerging. That then you are hoping to not only increase access, but also to decrease the barrier around stigma and secrecy. And I'm going to just add in shame and embarrassment for people to access this really effective medicine, with then the hope that that kind of that tide rises other. Is that accurate?
That is 100% accurate. Yes.
Awesome. I love that. And how's it going? How's it working? Like how is it happening for you at Enthea? Like I've been watching and cheering you all on, and I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about kind of where things stand for that and where you'd like for it to go?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for cheering us on.
Yeah.
It's it's going well. It is not always easy convincing companies, even though there's all this data and there's all this evidence, and there's even like great, there's a huge business advantage to employers for offering this. There's like a business case in terms of, you know, ROI on increased productivity and reduced absenteeism and lower healthcare spend. There's all of this data. And yet it's not easy to convince employers that they should offer something new, that they should
Right.
be an innovator, that, you know, they should do something that most companies are not doing, and sort of lead the way.
Mm.
And so it's going well. We have grown from 500 covered lives to over 150,000 in the past year. So
Nice.
really happy about that. And thanks
That's
to,
huge. And that's like a
yeah,
really high growth trajectory. That's a lot of people you're influencing. Because I always think
that,
about it like a multi-generational influence, right? It's not just the patient themselves or the client
yes,
themselves. It's
they're going to talk to
everyone
the
they're in a
family.
relationship.
They're going to
Yeah.
talk to everyone about it. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's been a lot of growth, and t- huge thanks to the whole Enthea team for making that possible. And we have grown our provider network as well. So we have nationwide coverage and providers in every state. We have also diversified and are starting to offer other treatments besides ketamine-assisted therapy. So looking at other mental health treatments that are not covered by traditional insurance, like
Yeah.
stellate ganglion block, TMS. We're looking to cover psilocybin, like you mentioned, in states
Right.
like
Yeah.
Oregon. So great news on that front. And then we've just seen really great patient outcomes, like an 86% reduction in PTSD, a 67% reduction in anxiety, sorry, 67, yeah, percent reduction in anxiety, and 65% reduction in depression. So yes, all great. And I guess the but is, like, given my drive and vision for Enthea, like I'm like, I want to help more people and more people and more people. Like,
Okay.
you know, how can we get that 150,000 to, like, you know, 1 million? And once we get to 1 million, I'll be like, how can we get it to 2 million? So there, you know, I'm always thinking about how can we do more?
I love that. And I appreciate that. And I'm happy to spread the word because I think it's really, really important. One of the things that you mentioned is getting part of the mission of Enthea too is linking together, employers and then, potential clients who are working with the employer with good clinics. And so
Yes.
you're kind of serving a role as kind of a little bit of a vetting too. Like, I will
Yes.
kind of vet the clinics and create partnerships between these with those that we consider to be providing good service. That was kind of is it accurate?
Yes. That is completely accurate. And I think that's such an important piece that I don't talk about often enough, you know, like on podcasts or things like this. But our provider network is really important to us. So we do serve this role of vetting. So for the employer or for the patient, they can trust that when they're seeing an Enthea vetted or credentialed in-network provider, they're getting quality care. It's not like some shady ketamine clinic that opened last week that isn't properly licensed. So there's that aspect of it, which is really important for the patient ultimately, but also for the provider. This is, I think, a really important service of one. We know that in the behavioral health industry, providers have not been treated fairly by traditional insurance. They haven't gotten reimbursed at appropriate rates or at an appropriate time span, or it's very complicated to get reimbursed. And so we're trying to pave the way to set a different standard where
Right.
we are compensating providers the way they should be compensated and compensating them timely, making it easy for them and incentivizing them, like, to work with, quote unquote insurance or plans like Enthea, so that we solve for this problem of access, because that is a huge issue. If providers
Yeah.
don't want to work with insurance or don't want to work with plans, then, that's what leads to this access issue as well. And then also for the providers, hopefully we are helping them we're driving business to them, right? So we're bringing patients in the door, which I think is really important, especially as, there's been a lot of shifts in the psychedelic industry, and it's not necessarily easy to survive in it, unfortunately. So hopefully we can help be part of that solution for providers.
Well, and how do you, as a person who, co-founded a training and content company, the Living Medicine Institute, I'm obviously also really curious just about, what do you see the role of training in all of that? And then kind of related to that, how can we in a training role, or we in kind of a role of influencing or participating in this field, really, continue to kind of help move the field in, ways with integrity and what makes a good psychedelic organization. Yeah, what's the role of training? What makes a good provider? And then, how can we help with that or participate in that?
Well, not to throw the question back at you, which I know probably isn't good practice, but if you'll humor me, I would love to hear, like, you've built a training program. So I would love to hear, and from what I can tell, a fantastic one. And so I would love to hear your answer to your own question for this one, Sandy.
Oh, funny. Okay. Well, all right then. I mean, first and foremost, we only work with licensed providers. And so we anticipate, we work with clinical and medical professionals. So, speaking specifically to the therapist side, the psychotherapy side, is that we anticipate that people are going to be good therapists and good providers first. And so that's really important. Second is that it's not just the medicine, that we understand that the medicine is a piece of a therapeutic process. And that's fundamentally different than the use of psychedelics for spiritual growth or for recreation. Even, recreation can be therapeutic, but it's not therapy. And so, that the medicine is embedded within a therapeutic process, and that, that the training be about the both, and that it's about how do we apply our clinical and therapeutic skills in preparation and helping the client access the medicine in a way that is in alignment with their treatment goals. And then integration, and then how do we work the integration piece? Because the field really, in my opinion, overemphasizes the medicine. The medicine is a very powerful tool, but it's like ketamine-assisted psychotherapy or psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy versus just the medicine alone is like meat and fruit. I mean, you can eat them both, but they're nothing alike, really. They're not the same. And so, really, we have a lot of influence over our clients, and there's a lot of opportunity to do that wrong. There's a tremendous amount of trust they're putting into us. So, high level of attention to creating an effective therapeutic container, I think, is just of critical importance. So, now, what do you think?
I really agree with you. I'm so glad I asked you to answer that question, because you did a great job. Yeah, I don't know if I have anything more to add. I completely agree on, I mean, like, we have the data to show that the medicine without the therapy just simply isn't as effective. It's not that it doesn't do anything, but like you said, it's meat and fruit. It's just, you need both. You need, or
Well,
for
and
vegetarians there, you
in
need
the
some protein in your diet. But
totally.
yes.
And the application piece, like we can teach forever about like what ketamine does to the brain and all of that stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is great. And having an understanding of the research is super important. And I love that. And that's still not clinical application. So I think we in the training business really need to be focusing on, how do we actually treat clients and patients effectively for the issues with which they came in. They're presenting
Yeah.
issues. So, um, so,
I
kind of go ahead.
And I was just going to add to that I think, and this is like an area where I know others are trying to add to in this field, like what we do need in the psychedelic space is a functioning accreditation or credentialing board or certification board for practitioners, right? And something that keeps people accountable and also keeps people up to date on these skills. So we unfortunately don't have that in a functioning way today. I know people are working on this. And I'm looking forward to the day where, you know, just like with other fields of medicine, there is a certification board where people can be, you know, licensed.
Yeah, I mean, it's essential. And so I love that you brought that up. So last question, I'm aware of the time.
Yes.
You know, either
Yeah.
one
Choices.
thing that you'd like to share about yourself or Enthea that we might not have covered, or one thing that you'd really like to put out there as important for the field, you know, to really hold. And maybe they're the same.
Yeah. I think that what's important for the field that I don't think will come as surprise to your listeners will be really spreading awareness and taking time to sort of live in alignment with our beliefs. I don't mean to sound preachy. That does sound very preachy. My apologies. But I think
I think it's just a statement of fact.
it's, and that's like, you know, I tell this advice to myself too, but I think it's really easy to get caught up in this field, you know, even me, like being all about the mission, going back to all about reducing suffering, and then forgetting in the everyday little moments in life, like what that looks like. So, you know, checking in with the people that you love and the people that you work with and like your friends and colleagues and family members to see like, how are they doing? How are they doing post hurricane? How are they doing post baby? How are they doing post job loss? Or just how are they doing generally? So this is like a little bit broader than Enthea, but people are suffering and we don't talk about it. And even when we work in mental health, we sometimes don't talk about it because we're so busy working.
Right.
And so I'm constantly reminding myself to take that time, and sometimes I forget, but that's one thing I want to leave this with is like, if we can all do better checking in with each other and caring for each other, then maybe that will lead to a happier, healthier world. And then, of course, on the Enthea side, I will say for anyone listening, you know, if there's like even someone you can remotely think of or some small chance that you think your organization or a friend's organization might be interested in offering this benefit to its employees, whether it's a company with 5 employees or 5,000 employees, it really doesn't matter. We can work with companies of all sizes. And the only way we're going to have a shift in the way we see these treatments is if they become more accessible and become more normal. So if anyone knows anyone that might be interested, then please feel free to go on the Enthea website and reach out to us or just contact me directly at sherry@enthea.com. Even, you know, happy to have a conversation, even if it's just a conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so, so much. This has been a really great conversation. I'm really grateful to you for agreeing to be on it and for doing that with me. And I love the way that you're approaching this work, and I'm happy to help promote that and cheerlead you. And I'm just really grateful. So thank you so, so much, Sherry.
Thanks, Sandy. Thank you a lot.
Thanks for listening to Living Medicine. We'll see you again next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.